Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Um, Darren, could you share the agenda, please? I wanted to give everybody the heads up that this meeting is being recorded. A recording will be posted on CARB's low carbon transportation meetings and workshop page once it's available, and that'll be in about 2 weeks. Well, greetings and welcome to the first of two fiscal year 2021-2022 and fiscal year 2022-2023 Advanced Technology Demonstration Pilot Project Implementation Workgroup meetings. This meeting is not the HVIP Implementation Workgroup meeting. That meeting is today at 1, nor is this the core public workgroup meeting. That meeting is tomorrow. Today, we're going to focus on the Advanced Technology Demonstration and Pilot Project Program, the projects we can support, how to apply, and how the funding is going to work. We will hold a second workgroup meeting before the release of the solicitation. The discussion today will be high level. The goal here is to get stakeholders engaged, start the dialogue with CARB and CEC and potential project partners, and get some guidance from the work group. That's you. We want your feedback on some of the project constraints that we have flexibility on. I will at times during the presentation tee up questions for the work group to address and comment on. First, let me introduce myself. I'm Earl Lambert, CARB's lead staff for Advanced Technology Demonstration and Pilot Project Program. I am the CARB staff that is leading the solicitation development process. Other CARB or CEC staff that are part of this work group will introduce themselves when they first speak. We only have 2.5 hours to get through this work group meeting. That may sound like a lot of time, but we have a lot to cover. I will try my best to keep this meeting moving and cover all agenda items. So as we move forward, I will stop my presentation at certain points to ask for questions. Looking at the agenda, I will stop after bullet point 6, application requirements, after the discussion of project categories, which is bullet point 7, and then after the discussion on commercial hovercraft regulatory compliance, which on the agenda is listed as Tier 4 commercial hovercraft regulatory compliance. And then have a question period at the end after next steps. If we run out of time, we will schedule another workgroup meeting to address any issues that were not resolved. I would like to request that if you have any questions on the commercial hovercraft regulatory compliance funding, as I mentioned, we have a dedicated agenda item for that discussion, and questions about those funds should be saved until then to the best that we can. And just to complicate that a bit, we will be discussing other commercial hovercraft technology projects during the project category discussion that is not part of the funding set aside for commercial hovercraft regulatory compliance. But there'll be more details about that later. The program, the Advanced Technology Demonstration Pilot Project Program, has funded over 42 individual projects with $400 million in state funds, which has been paired with nearly $400 million in match funds from project partners. We have another tranche of funding this cycle that we want to get out, and this workgroup meeting is going to support that effort. CARB is bringing a total of $175 million, which is $40 million from the fiscal year 21-22 low carbon transportation funding plan, and $125 million from the fiscal year 2022-2023 funding plan for clean transportation incentives. That $125 million includes the $60 million from AB 179. Additionally, we are bringing up to an additional $50 million from the California Energy Commission for infrastructure support from their emerging opportunities funds, giving a total of $225 million. Projects that are supported by both CARB and CEC funding will be required to execute grants with both agencies. We will discuss this in more detail later in the presentation. The two funding plans that I mentioned has the detailed description of each of the eligible project categories and any additional requirements like benefits to priority populations. Now, at this point, Darren is going to put into the chat links to both of those two funding plans, the fiscal year 21-22 low carbon transportation funding plan and the fiscal year 22-23 low carbon transportation funding plan. In those two funding plans, you'll see chapter titled Advanced Technology Demonstration Pilot Projects. That is the chapters that are relevant to our discussion. So Darren, thank you, Darren. Before we dive into the meat of the presentation, I want to mention again that a recording of this meeting will be posted on the Low Carbon Transportation and AQUIP meetings and workshop page in about 2 weeks. This page was linked in the announcement for this meeting. If anyone cannot find it, send me an email and I will help you. Also, keep in mind that CARB and CE staff will be available for one-on-one meetings with any interested stakeholders to discuss their projects, go over requirements, discuss funding or match requirements, etc. Please send me an email and we can set something up. Darren is putting my email address in the chat now. And so there you have it. Please capture that so you have it. And thanks, Darren. Also keep in mind that projects that is selected for funding will have CARB supervision. No project will just get funding and move forward on its own. Projects are a team event, and CARB and CEC is part of that team. Projects that have CEC co-funding, as I said, will have CEC as part of their team as well, with the same role as CARB, which is oversight and making sure that public funds are used prudently. And I will point out that at some point, probably about halfway through the meeting, we'll take a bio break for about 5 minutes to give everybody a break, because it is morning here in California and a lot of us are drinking coffee. So that's going to be something that's going to be needed at some point. Okay, so I'm done with introduction to background, and now I'm going to move on to applicant eligibility. And as I mentioned in my opening remarks, we'll stop at after bullet point 6 for questions on what I'm talking about. So applicant eligibility. Only public agencies or California-based nonprofits are the only eligible applicants. Companies cannot directly apply for funding. Therefore, you must team with an eligible applicant if you want to apply for funding. Eligible applicants are public entities like air districts, port authorities, cities, universities, tribal governments, special districts, and the like. And California-based nonprofits need to have nonprofit status with the IRS, be registered with the California Secretary of State, and have experience in implementing similar size air pollution and technical projects. CARB will allow up to 5% of the project award to be used for project administration by the applicant, or at this point, post-award, they would be referred to as grantees. Companies or subcontractors that are on the Russian sanction list are not eligible to be part of an application. And if you submit an application that has any project partners or subcontractors that's on that list, the application will immediately be determined to be ineligible. Now I'm going to switch to priority population benefits, the next agenda item. Each of the 2 funding plans have a list of projects that are eligible for funding. All project categories from the fiscal year 21-22 funding plan require that projects benefit or be located in a priority population community. Fiscal year 22-23 funding plan allows some flexibility with the priority population requirement, but some projects like locomotives, commercial hovercraft, port vehicles and equipment, and zero emission aviation are required to benefit priority populations. Other projects like green zones, off-road and ag equipment, and the Tier 4 commercial hovercraft regulatory compliance funding will not require that they be spent in a priority population, but projects in this flexibility category that are located in priority populations will score higher than those that aren't. We will get into more detail about this in the project carry discussion a bit later, but benefiting a priority population is satisfied one of 3 ways: domicile location, registered location, or operated a majority of the time location. Projects that are required to be located in a priority population community, and this is determined by Cal and Screen 4.0. The estate is divided into census tracts, and each census tract has been given a score and a determination of benefiting a community. Darren is now going to put in a link to the priority population map that we're using. Look at this map, see where your project is located, click on that census tract, then the arrow on the right, and click that, and you'll be given 4 separate categories for each census tract. If any one of those categories are marked yes, then the project benefits a priority population. Now I'm going to move on to budget, funding, and match. As I mentioned at the beginning, we have a total of $225 million combined from CARB and CEC funds available. Those funds come with their own requirements and spending timelines. As far as I'm aware, we have 2 funding sources here: the state's general fund and the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, or GGRF. GGRF funds require that projects get greenhouse gas emission reductions, while the state's general fund gives some flexibility on the greenhouse gas emission reduction requirement, but still requires criteria pollutant emission reductions at least. Also included in this total is the $60 million for commercial hovercraft regulatory compliance. That $60 million is broken up with $40 million in general funds and $20 million from GGRF. So 1/3 of the commercial hovercraft regulatory compliance funding will be required to provide greenhouse gas emission reductions. Excuse me. Projects receiving an award under this solicitation may be eligible for CEC funding for zero-emission vehicle charging and or refueling infrastructure related to the project. The CEC will only add its funding under this solicitation to the projects competitively selected and first executed by CARB. The CEC will then execute agreements with recipients for this CEC funded work. A sample CEC scope of work, budget, and terms and conditions will be provided with the solicitation when it is released. It is our goal that CEC and CARB work once the applications are submitted, scored, and ranked to determine which projects will get CEC funding and therefore need for a second grant agreement. We are not intending that the applicants make a choice as to which agency funding is being sought. Now, that's with the exception of the $6 million for the commercial hovercraft regulatory compliance funds. Now I'm going to talk about match. CARB will require a funding match. The typical funding match for past projects has been 1-to-1, or for every dollar that project partners contribute, CARB and CEC will contribute $1. The match typically composes of 2 types of funds: cash and in-kind. In-kind match is generally considered assets that are currently owned by the project partners that will be used in support of the project. Examples could be the cost of a locomotive hulk that will be repowered to zero emission, or parts for the conversion of a vessel to Tier 4 for regulatory compliance that are already owned by the project team. Cash match is pretty self-explanatory, but to be clear, cash match are costs paid by the project partners during the course of the project in support of the project as spelled out in the application and the grant agreement. Example, during the data collection phase, cost to operate equipment can be considered to be cash match, but too much reliance on this method for match generation will not be seen too well during the application and scoring. And also a good example for in-kind match for commercial hovercraft is the cost for U.S. Coast Guard plan review, even if those costs have already been incurred and spent. So here's the first question for the work group meeting. So keep this in mind as we move forward and get to the question portion. And so we have the ability to adjust the match ratio from 1-to-1. Some questions for the work group to consider are: do we want to reduce the required match for small businesses? Do we want to reduce the required match for projects that get greenhouse gas emissions from the commercial hovercraft regulatory compliance funding category? And here's what: do we want to increase the match for large companies? So keep that in mind as we get to the question portion to ask questions on that, or to give us your feedback, because it's important. And finally, for this agenda item, I want to talk about stacking of funding. The main theme for allowing the stacking of incentive funding is that like cannot be used to match like. What this means is that GGRF funds cannot be used to stack with GGRF funds, and general funds cannot be used with general funds. The thinking right now is that HVIP, which is for on-road trucks, and CORE, which is the off-road incentive program, will not be allowed to be used as stacking funds or match. We could allow Moyer to be used as match. Another consideration, especially with Moyer, is that we need to apportion the emission reductions between the two programs. This, by its very nature, will make those projects that use these incentive funds as match a little less competitive than those projects that use their own funding as match. Other non-state sources of funding, such as federal funds or AB 923 funds, could be used to support a project and are encouraged. I'm going to move to the Solicitation and Information Implementation Timeline agenda item. It is our goal to have a second work group meeting before the release of the solicitation. The solicitation is expected to be released this spring. It will be open for about 4 months, closing late summer, with the expectation that awards be issued in the fall, and then CEQA being resolved, and finally grant agreements being executed before the end of the year. Projects would start in the first quarter of 2024, with completion of all projects no later than spring of 2027. Without legislative approval, we cannot extend projects beyond this timeline. Each project will have a series of critical project review meetings. The goal here is to assemble CARB and CEC staff, and with a presentation from the project partners at critical project times, to make a determination if the project continues. These meetings will be embedded in the project timeline. And so now I'm going to tee up another question for the work group, and that is, should we allow funding under the Tier 4 Commercial Hovercraft Regulatory Compliance funding to have a shorter deadline to submit applications? Okay, now we're going to move to application requirement agenda item. After we finish this agenda item, we'll open it up for questions. Every application needs an eligible applicant. Only California-based public agencies and nonprofits are eligible to be applicants. Individual companies or vessel owners are not allowed to apply directly. Using this method allows us to get the funds out much quicker than if we allowed for a contract process. Applications need to have all project elements included and identified. Data collection and reporting is a required element for any application. Each application will have a fully fleshed out budget, timeline from the start to completion of the project. Reports will be required at least quarterly. CARB and CEC staff will be embedded in all projects and will have an oversight role. If the technology that is being funded is not commercially available, then a plan for CARB certification or verification of the technology will be a required milestone in the application. Most projects will need to have a workforce development component and plan to share the results with communities where these projects are located and other end user fleets, even if they are your competitors. Projects will be required to report results, job creation and retention, and emission reductions. A quick comment about project partners. We've been doing these types of projects for about 14 years, and we've learned a lot. One big issue we've had is project partners dropping out mid-project due to a change in company ownership or a switch out of executives. CARB considers past performance of project partners when scoring applications. Applications that have project partners that have dropped out of past projects midway through the project for the reasons I mentioned will score lower. Also, project partners from past projects that have not honored their commitments will be scored down as well. When I say did not honor their commitments, that could mean many things, but it could be not following through with what is in their letter of support submitted as part of the application, or the sub-agreements with the applicant or the project team. If you want to participate in a project, we want you to be committed. Further, we don't want to exclude very committed project teams that didn't score as well at the expense of projects that have project partners that are not committed. Now, when I say this, the reverse is also true. Project partners that have done excellent jobs may score a little higher in applications. All submitted applications will be scored and ranked. Those ranked the highest will be offered funding until funding is exhausted within the constraints of the source funding. The goal of this work group process and the scoring criteria in the solicitation is to allow project categories, all project categories to complete on equal footing. The only current carve-out of funding for a specific project category is the $60 million for Tier 4 commercial hovercraft compliance. I would like to hear from the work group about any needed funding carve-out for the project categories, or ways to craft scoring criteria to make for a fairer competition between the eligible project categories. With all that said, we're not going to require funding of each of the eligible project categories. Now we're going to pause for questions. Jason?
Thank you, Earl. If you would like to make a comment or ask a question, please use the webinar feature to raise your hand. If you are participating via phone, please press #2 to raise your hand. I'll announce the name of the commenter and then unmute your line. And please be sure to introduce yourself by stating your name and affiliation. And also please note that once your line is open, you will still need to unmute yourself. Looks like we have 2 commenters right now, and I will start with Irvi Negrani.
Hey, Earl, thank you so much for this presentation. I wanted to ask a clarifying question about how CARB will be upvoting basically and downvoting some of these applicants based on past performance over the last 14 years. Is that information that CARB will be publishing in any way so that new market entrants can know, hey, maybe this partner who's got a great sales deck, great pitch, isn't as reliable, or is that documentation available in some sort of aggregated way? I think that's kind of one of those things that, especially for these nonprofits, you don't necessarily know which air districts have been great on the back end or not, or which industry nonprofits have taken that role seriously behind the scenes.
You know, that's a great question, Irvi. We don't have a document like that, though we've talked about it internally. I'm going to tee that up for the team to discuss after the work group meeting and see if that's something that we can provide. I think the sign of that is, or the indication, and this isn't a foolproof indication, but when project partners drop out of projects and we have switch outs of fleets or OEMs that change versus the application, that's kind of a sign of that, but we haven't formally listed those. So I appreciate that comment, and we'll address that at the next work group meeting.
And I feel like there's a clear indication when it's a large change like an OEM swap that people tend to notice, because folks who've been in the industry for long enough will know that. But I think one of the things is when we think about sort of the macro level environment with lots of new OEMs, lots of new federal monies to bring companies in, lots of folks kind of onshoring projects who haven't worked in the California space, I think anything we can do to bring those entrants up to speed on how to behave responsibly will be good for the overall market to have their experiences also as mature as what CARB wants to see.
Okay, that's a great comment. I'll add that behind the scenes right now, we're trying to develop a little stronger language in our grant agreements that allow us to have a little more ability to invoke some type of sanctions on companies that get into a project, we get allocated funding, and maybe spend funding, but then drop out. And so we're trying to figure out a better way to do that rather than our current system. But thanks for those comments, Irvi. Jason, next question.
Our next question is from Todd Roberts.
Good morning, sir. My name is Todd Roberts. I'm with the Marine Group Boatworks in San Diego. We're a shipyard or a small shipyard that does a lot of installation and repowers on commercial harbor craft. And a lot of our clients are looking to us to try to help them navigate funding opportunities. And at the beginning of your presentation, I hear that an applicant of a privately owned vessel must partner with a public agency to be an applicant. So I'm asking, how does that work in real life? So if I'm a tugboat operator, say in San Diego, or I'm an excursion vessel operator, how would you envision that private operator partnering with a public agency to apply for a Tier 4 upgrade?
Well, the Tier 4 upgrade is a, oh, it looks like I've got some feedback. Let me just mute for a second. Okay, hopefully that worked. I have some lawn garden people coming in next door to my house. Well, first of all, an eligible applicant is either a public agency or an eligible nonprofit. We utilize that mechanism really to simplify the flow of funds. So there's an actual reason for us doing this. Contracts can generally add an extra year to the whole process, and so that's why we do this. The building the relationship with the air district, a university, a port, like your example with a tugboat. The idea here really is to, that tugboats are probably operating out of a public port. That public port could be the applicant, as well as a harbor district or port authority. And so really we try to spread this as wide open as possible to allow the individual vessel operator to find a team that's going to help them. Really the goal of this is to have a more dedicated administrative team as well. And so that's what the role of the applicant's going to be. With the say a tugboat in San Diego, there's a couple places where they could team with that public agency. So, Todd, I'm not sure that I answered your question directly, but I think I danced around it a bit to maybe give you an answer. Do you have any follow-on question there?
Yeah, in your 14 years, you said you've been doing programs like this. Can you give me an example where a privately owned vessel was able to team with a government agency to apply, or successfully or unsuccessfully apply? I'm just trying to. Yeah, I'm trying to again, I don't really have a horse in the race. I'm trying to help navigate my clients and say, go talk to X and see if X will do it with you.
Yep.
Because every time we approach a public agency about anything, we hear how busy they are and understaffed they are and how could they possibly do anything. So yeah, I'm curious, like, what's a real life example?
Okay, I'll give you our real life examples. We did a hybrid tugboat retrofit back in 2012. The grantee there was Port of LA. We currently have a hydrogen fuel cell ferry demo. The grantee there is Bay Area Air Quality Management District. I will point out the project summaries for all of our projects are posted on our website, so you can go in there and see all of the different applicants that have been used. But typically, it's air districts, ports, universities. It can even be a school district. It's pretty wide open. So and then we also did a tugboat retrofit project with South Coast Air Quality Management District. And so those are the types of grantees that we worked with in the past. But we worked with a wide variety of grantees, from small nonprofits with 4 or 5 staff to large air districts like South Coast with 1,000+ staff members. The lure for the public agency or nonprofit to participate in your project is the promise of up to 5% of the project award as administrative funding. So they're not doing this for free. They're going to get paid to be the administrator. And then also a point when you're talking to eligible applicants is that once they get into the process, they then become a little bit more attractive for other projects in the future. So it kind of opens up that funding pipeline for that agency as well. And so that's what we've seen is when we get into projects like with some nonprofits, and we have projects right now with entities like GTI Energy, CalSTAR, Center for Transportation and Environment, that then begets additional projects for them because they have that experience going forward. Todd, I hope that answered your question and provided a little more detail for you.
No, I appreciate it. We'll reach out to the Port of San Diego and the APCD and see if they're willing participants. Because if they're not, then I think you have to go down to another tier and try and find a nonprofit or something like that.
Right. Well, yeah, from my personal experience, the San Diego Port Authority is really interested in doing our project. So I would reach out to them and the Air District. We've done projects with San Diego Air Pollution Control District, and they've submitted applications with us as well, and we'd be comfortable with them as a grantee. Good.
Very well,
Okay.
thank you.
You bet. Next question, Jason.
Sure. And just a reminder, please be sure to state your name and affiliation when speaking. Our next speaker is Leah Harnish.
Hi, can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. Hi, my name is Leah. I'm with the American Waterways Operators. We represent the tugboat, towboat, and barge industry. I have two questions. The first is a follow-on to what Todd had been saying. Is there any idea of if funds are going to be not automatically distributed, but different projects will be scored to kind of make sure that funding is distributed evenly across the state, and kind of how that would work given the commercial hovercraft carve out?
Okay, so you're talking about the commercial hovercraft carve out, or the other two project categories that are associated with a commercial hovercraft?
Both, if you have an answer.
Okay. Well, because there's, and we'll talk about this in a little more detail, but the commercial hovercraft carve out is a distinct item, and so we can, when we talk about things, we need to talk about both of those kind of separately. So the Tier 4 a commercial hovercraft regulatory compliance carve out, we need to figure out a way to geographically distribute that, so that funding is not being all used in, say, San Diego or South Coast, at the Bay Area, and the other locations where those vessels operate have an equal chance to get that funding. And these are comments that I would like to get back from the work group on how best to do that. The other funding that's not associated with the regulatory compliance, we don't have a requirement to make sure that that money is distributed throughout the whole state. The goal of our program is not necessarily to ensure that the money is distributed equally across the whole state, though that is a wonderful goal. The goal of the program is to advance technology, to push it quicker than it would normally happen in an organic way, and get that technology out quicker, so the other funding programs can then take that technology and help with the widespread commercialization. So the goal is really project specific. Now, like with the, as I mentioned, the commercial hovercraft regulatory compliance funds, that's a little different because we're working on regulatory compliance and not necessarily trying to advance the state of technology. So we'll get into that detail a little bit more when we talk about that category.
Okay, great.
Sure.
Oh, sorry. I had another question, but
Okay,
thank you
sure.
for that. Yeah, we asked because we have had issues with this type of funding where it's spread out evenly, but then there's nothing really specific for the commercial hovercraft industry. My second question is about surplus requirements.
What was that again? I'm sorry, I missed it.
Surplus requirements.
Surplus, okay.
Yeah, and I was curious if any of these programs have that.
The answer is no. We do not. For demonstration pilot projects, the emission reductions do not need to be surplus to regulation at this point. Now, the commercial hovercraft regulatory compliance funding obviously is directed at regulatory compliance. So there is that nuance, but we don't have that requirement like Moyer does.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
You bet. Are there more questions?
Yes, our next speaker is Joanne Golden.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Hi, Errol. Thank you so much for finally holding this workshop. Joanne Golden. I'm with Gladstein Neandros and Associates. We are clean transportation, clean energy consultants. And I have a couple of different questions. So I'm really trying to hone in on the areas that are not commercial hovercraft. So despite the areas that the two past speakers have really honed in on. So am I to understand that with this 60 million set aside, that what is available for all those other off-road categories and the green zone could be up to 165 million? So the 225 million minus the 60 million set aside?
Yes.
Okay. Is there a requirement that a project do both CARB funding and CEC funding? So what I'm trying to get to is in fact that 60 million set aside going to now go into that CEC bucket as well, and maybe it's not 165 million.
Well, there's a chance for that. Commercial hovercraft regulatory compliance, we'll get into more detail of that later, but the funding split between GGRF and general fund. And so projects that have in that bucket of funding that have that are going for full zero emission or zero emission capable, and we'll define that a little bit more later, we'll need to have some type of infrastructure component. That doesn't mean that that those projects will automatically get moved over to CEC. CARB can fund infrastructure too. But the goal is really to position those CEC dollars to help implement the infrastructure components of projects. And so if we think that that's the most viable way to get that funding out, then we'll take that opportunity.
So I have just a couple of other
Sure.
quick follow-ons to that as I'm trying to dig in a little bit. So thinking through on the deadline associated with the 2027. I'm assuming for the data collection, you might have some sort of a requirement of how much time you need. Are you thinking you might have 6 months? Are you thinking you might have 1 year? I think what I'm trying to figure out is like, when does the deployment actually need to happen to like back into that timeline a little bit?
Joanne, what a great question. Because I haven't addressed that yet in my speaking points, but generally, the data collection component of a project, we've had a time limit of as low as 3 months and as long as a year. Now, the things to consider, and these are questions for the work group. So what do you guys think is an adequate amount of time? But we need to consider that if there's a demonstration project, and I'll define that a little bit better here in a little bit, that data collection period needs to be long enough to allow for CARB certification. So example, a zero emission locomotive to get CARB certification, and I could be wrong, but I seem to recall that this is correct. We need at least 3,000 hours of operation. And so to do that 3,000 hours of operation in state, you're not gonna be able to do that in 3 months. It's gonna take at least a year. And so it could be contingent on the type of project, and if certification is gonna be a required component. We'll get down into this detail a little bit more with a commercial hovercraft regulatory compliance funds, but do we need a year's worth of data collection and emission testing on commercially available engines that are being repowered routinely? And the answer to that is probably no. So these are things that we need to work through and decide what is really a reasonable data collection timeframe. But again, it's going to really depend on the type of technology that's being deployed, if it's a demonstration or a pilot project.
And then the last question that I have really gets to, I'm imagining that there are going to be a variety of applications that you receive that try to combine multiple technologies and maybe multiple of those bullets, right, of eligible kind of projects into a single project. So let's say that there are some tier 4 hovercraft related projects that are getting included, but then there's also some construction activity being included in an application and a couple of others. Would you basically be carving up that application so you're dedicating some of that funding to the set aside?
Good question. It depends on how that application is being submitted. In the application, and we'll talk about this in a little more detail, for a commercial hovercraft regulatory compliance, I think the application is going to have to say, hey, I'm after that pot of funds. And if you're doing a project where you're doing a commercial hovercraft project along with, say, some off-road equipment, we would love to see larger projects. Larger projects are good because they're very impressive, they have impact, and we're able to assess a more diverse group of vehicles, vessels, and technology at once. But if you're going for that regulatory compliance funding, you want to make sure that you're not going to get edged out because your project is too diverse. So the recommendation there would be to apply for the other commercial hovercraft funding pots. That way, CARB and CEC can make sure that the funding is allocated properly. But with all that said, it's not going to be a requirement that you only have the Tier 4 a commercial hovercraft requirement or regulation funding. That could be combined with other aspects of an application. And if we need to fund some of that with CEC funding, then we'll go ahead and coordinate with CEC, of course, and see if we can do that.
And you did just bring something up that led me to another question, and this will be my
Great.
last one, I promise.
Oh, it's okay.
So do you have thoughts about minimums related to project size or maximums surrounding how much?
Great question. I think for project, and we'll get into this a little bit more, green zones, a minimum project size is probably advantageous. But right now we don't have a minimum or a maximum. I think when we did ZANZEF, which was a solicitation we did back in 17, 18, which was 205 million, we had a maximum of $50 million there for a project award. I'm not sure that was an effective cap, honestly. So that's something that we'll take back and talk internally and probably have a much better response by the second work group.
All right, thank you.
You bet. Okay, do we have any more questions?
Yes, our next caller will be Stacy Callis.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, Stacy.
Hey, Earl. Hey, this is Stacy Cayes with Clean Air Grant Services. Our staff has administered over 100 million in funds and secured over 60 million in funding for air quality related projects. We're actually in the process of establishing a nonprofit hoping to help serve the community associated with the Tier 4 marine funding for commercial hovercraft. I have a couple of different questions. A couple of questions related to the hovercraft piece pertaining to the 60 million, and then another for the demonstration funding. So first, regarding the commercial hovercraft, I'm curious if the priority population map also coincides with the commercial hovercraft report or commercial hovercraft regulation DAC map that's supposed to be utilized. I believe I've been pointed by CARB regulatory staff a few times to use the SB 535 map. And I just want to make sure that, you know, that the two maps are kind of talking to each other in that sense. Do you have any information on that?
Those maps are definitely talking to each other. They are both informative for our funding. So there's a difference between funding and the regulatory compliance. And so for the funding source, we need to use the map that Darren posted. So that has a little more flexibility in locations where projects are available.
Okay, great. And so if an applicant is outside of one of those priority populations, but they do travel inside or nearby, what's the qualifier? So the regulation looks at 2 miles, you know, within an identified DAC community. What would qualify a marine project? You know, what's the distance, I guess?
Right.
So like if they're in Dana Point, you know, but they're going over to outside of LA Harbor, how close do they need to be?
Right, it's a good question. What I mentioned earlier is there's 3 ways to satisfy the requirement for benefiting a disadvantaged community, and that's the domicile location, the registration location, or where it's used a majority of the time. Now, if the vessels are stationed at any of the major ports, they are benefiting a priority population. And so it's going to come down to either one of those 4 things: where are they located, like in a port, or are they located in a disadvantaged community or a priority population. So that's really how it's going to be determined. So if it's operating 50% of the time at the Port of LA, as an example, for a tugboat, say, but it's domiciled at Dana Point, that still satisfies the requirement for benefiting a priority population. Now, how many miles out to sea? I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the requirement is in the map, but generally the zone for the maps does not extend too far offshore. And so you'll see that some of the projects that we're not really funding here are projects for vessels that are transiting, say, between Hawaii and San Diego, as an example, because they're really not spending a whole lot of time in California, though we are funding projects that do that from previous funding sources.
Okay. And then how would an applicant, so I have kind of a unique example here, and it's actually a real life example. So, there's an applicant down in San Diego that isn't within the 2 miles of the identified DAC community, but they operate over there. What will you accept as proof of operation in those areas? Is it just a statement in the application? Do we need to show GPS data? Like how?
Well, I think a statement in the application that's backed up by some data will be sufficient. If say you submit an application and you've written that into the application, and here at CARB and CEC, we're scoring applications and we don't think that it's adequately addressed, and we think that the project has a good chance of getting funding, we'll come back and ask you for more clarification.
Perfect. I've got one more question towards the Harborcraft funding.
Okay.
And I might have missed this, so I apologize if that's the case. But the 60 million available, and you pointed to the AB 179 bill, and it's my recollection that bill highlights specific eligible vessels that are going to be prioritized. So research vessels, excursion, passenger fishing vessels. I think that's what I remember. So
and ferries,
and ferries. So there was a previous caller that had an example of a tugboat. How will those vessels, which are significantly in need of being prioritized for funding? I have probably a dozen projects right now, tug vessels that are ineligible for Carl Moyer because the state hasn't updated the guidelines to coincide with the Harborcraft regulation. Will those applicants be entertained, or will they be put on a backup list automatically because they don't qualify as those types of vessels?
That's a great question, and I'll dive into more detail on that when we get to the project category. But just to answer your question, is like you say, the AB 179 legislation prioritizes a subset of vessels, 5 types. It doesn't exclude them. It just says that we will prioritize them. So an example, a tugboat's not on that list, but it doesn't mean it's ineligible. It could be eligible. And so I would encourage them to submit an application as well. But with the zero emission tugboat as the example, there are other project categories that could be used to fund that. And the example is we have 2 commercial hovercraft project categories that stand alone outside of the 60 million. And then we also have a category called port vehicles and equipment. The port vehicles and equipment category could include tugboats. And then on top of that, we have a green zones, which we'll talk about here in a minute. A project like that could fit in that category as well. So there's other opportunities for those vessels. And then the final point I want to make is, when we receive all of these applications and we score and rank, one thing that we really look at is the total ask. And so we have $225 million available, but if we get $750 million in applications, that really makes a statement to the state legislature that we need additional funding. And so when we went through this similar process for zero emission drayage trucks back in 2019, we received, we had, I believe, somewhere about $40 to $50 million in funding, and we received over $100 million in applications. The legislature came back the following year and gave us funding to fund the rest of those projects. And so demonstrating that need is also really important. And so another important component of that evolution with the drayage trucks is we did not have to re-solicit. We just took that money and applied it to projects, applications that we already had in-house. So that could be something that we do in the future as well, depending on how much money the legislature appoints for demonstration and pilot projects, or if they have a specific line item for a specific categories like they did with drayage pilot, and again this year with Tier 4 commercial hovercraft regulatory compliance.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
I'm not going to ask my next question because I think you might get into it in a little bit. So
Okay. Great.
Thank you.
All right, Jason, how many more people do we have with questions?
We have 11 more raised hands in the queue.
Okay. I'm just going to ask those that have their hands up in the queue if this is the appropriate time to ask that question, or if you have project-specific questions that you want to address. I'm going to give, let's do 6 more minutes of questions, and then we're going to have to cut that off and address those questions later in the program. So let's go ahead and take the next question in mind that we're only going to do this for 6 more minutes, and then we're going to talk about project categories. Okay, Jason?
Okay. Our next speaker is Peter Ellison.
Good morning, Earl. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
All right, Peter Ellison from Ripos. Quick question on your scoring. And can you talk a little bit more about the categories and how an applicant is scored, and what categories as you're looking at an applicant have a higher weight to them than others, and
right.
And is the scoring the ultimate decision for awarding a grant?
First of all, yes, scoring is the determinant in awarding a grant. So most of our past solicitations are available on our website. Those will indicate how we score projects. And so in there is a scoring criteria and how those are weighted and what we look for. Now, we typically recycle those year after year with minor updates to get an idea about how we do this. I would take a look at those. If you can't find them, send me an email. I'm more than happy to send you a link. But some of the things that are really important to us, especially with demonstration and pilot projects, is the ability to advance the technology. Now, that's the overarching goal of all demonstration and pilot projects. And so the commercial hovercraft regulatory compliance funding may be a little bit different, but the ability to get emission reductions, the ability to from the project, and also after the project is commercialized or deployed in large numbers is very important to us. Other components I think that are going to be important are these going to be kind of weighted on the different project categories. It's going to be workforce training and equity. And you can see us looking through that equity lens is really important as it is related to benefiting priority populations. That's a legislative requirement on our funding. And so, doing that equity and workforce training, I think, is a really important component. Having relationships with community groups as part of your project is also going to be important. With that said, probably some of the largest aspects of the funding is going to be on the quality of the project team, the amount of match that's being brought toward the project, and the ability to execute that project in the timely manner. And if you're doing a demonstration project, to get certification at the end of that project.
Thank you.
Up here. Next question, Jason.
Our next question is from James Dumont.
Hi, Earl. Thank you, Jason. Yes, I have 2 questions if I can squeeze them in. So first one is, would an eligible applicant be allowed to request funding for multiple vessels under a single application?
Yes.
Excellent. So we could propose like a ferry and a tugboat under a single proposal. Great.
Mm-hmm.
Next up, question/recommendation. The California Maritime Academy has lots of vessels of varying sizes and power. They're used to train cadets to become the nation's leading merchant mariners. while these vessels are often have low operating hours, would CARB consider funding retrofits, repowers, or replacements of those vessels to really build up the workforce development for decarbonizing the maritime sector?
Yeah, ideally, yes. One of the project categories under AB 179 is research vessels. So those are available for funding under the $6 million set aside.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Earl. Thanks,
Yeah.
Jason.
James, just assuming that they're regulated under the commercial hovercraft regulation, of course.
Okay, thank you. And I forgot to identify them with momentum for posterity.
Very good. I think we'll do one more question, and then we're going to continue on with the project category discussion. Okay. Jason, final question.
Looks like our next question is from Brad Engel.
Yeah, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, Brad, I can hear you.
Hi, Earl. Brad Engel, Flagship Cruises and Events. My question is, I know for some of the private applicants and other funding, partnership with the PUC, if you're regulated under your ferry for the PUC, that counts as a qualified application. Would that qualify in this case?
First blush, the answer is yes. With that said, we have to talk to our legal department if there's any conflict of interest between the PUC being the regulator and a grantee. But on first blush, I don't see an issue with that.
Okay, and then one more question, just because I know we're short on time. Am I allowed to submit multiple applications to show the need? I have two separate projects that I'd be looking at, and they're different. So yeah. Can one person submit two different projects?
You bet, but they have to be different.
They are different.
There you go.
Thanks for your time, Earl.
There's no limit on the number of applications that could be submitted by an entity. They just have to be different. If they're not different, then CARB will score all those applications together and choose the winning one to compete against the others.
No, they're both different, and we wouldn't want one to bring down the other anyway, so we'd want them to stand alone. So perfect. Right. Thank you.
Okay, great. So now we're going to move toward doing the project category discussion. So Darren is going to put the agenda back up. Thank you, Darren. Excellent. And so here, when I discuss project categories, I'll be using language like demonstration project and pilot project. As far as we're concerned with this program, the demonstration projects are generally pre-commercial, and vehicle and equipment ownership is not normally retained by the company that is building the equipment. It's retained by the company building the equipment, not the end user fleet. Pilot projects are generally deployments of larger numbers of commercially available vehicles and equipment with ownership retained by the end user fleet. Each type of project will require to coordinate data collection and sharing, reporting on progress, as well as workforce development components and reporting. An application submitted needs to have all of these team members in place with an eligible applicant. All but a few of the following project categories could see support from CEC for infrastructure, and therefore could necessitate two grant agreements between the two agencies. It is not uncommon for CARB and CEC to fund projects this way, and we're getting better at it every day. So let's talk about project categories. The first one I'm going to talk about is green zones. This is a little bit different from all the other project categories. I'll just explain it and see what the questions look like. So green zones are zero emission, holistic projects that could be focused on almost any operations within a city, municipality, or a group of cities that currently uses combustion technologies in carrying out the duties of the municipality. Projects will showcase zero emission technologies while overcoming challenges to the adoption through activities such as streamlining infrastructure permitting and determining what systems need to be in place for a municipality to foster widespread zero emission technology adoption. Projects must directly reduce emissions, but may also include funding to support a robust local public process, updates to local ordinances and other requirements, and should encourage other cities to adopt green zone policies within their jurisdictions. Projects could include roadway and vehicle telematics, targeted incentive for public and private vehicles, large scale zero emission commercial lawn and garden equipment for schools and their parks and recreation departments, zero emission construction equipment, zero emission waste collection, and other functions that are performed or contracted by a municipality that can be converted to zero emissions. Projects in this category will score higher if they are located in or benefit a disadvantaged community. Now, I'm just going to go through each one of the project categories and we'll have a discussion at the end. The next project category is resilient zero emission vessel charging project. The focus here is on deploying on-site renewable power generation to provide renewable charging or refueling for zero emission capable commercial harbor craft. This is a project type that could see substantial support from the CEC for infrastructure deployments. Modular zero emission capable cargo handling equipment demonstration. The goal here is to build and deploy zero emission cargo handling equipment, such as container handlers or bulk equipment, or other off-road equipment that would be designed with modular powertrains and energy systems to facilitate the transition to full zero operation as technology evolves. So projects in this category could say start with a tier 4 engine, then convert to tier 4 plus hybrid, and then maybe finally to fuel cell. And the goal here is to have this same piece of equipment be able to accept those different powertrains. Next project category, emission reductions from ocean-going vessels. There are 3 project types in this category. The funding to demonstrate the feasibility of hydrogen fuel cells to replace auxiliary engine operations on ocean-going vessels while at berth or anchor. Demonstrate a hydrogen fuel cell or other low carbon technology to power a shore power barge, which could be used to provide shore power to berths without such equipment or to shore power capable vessels at anchor. The final project type in this category is barge mounted capture control systems for ocean going vessels at berth or anchor. Next project category is zero emission rail. Here, a demonstration or pilot of zero emission rail technologies that can operate in intrastate line haul, short haul, and switcher operations without requiring additional diesel locomotives in the consist. Projects in this category will be required to be located in or benefit a disadvantaged community. I'll also add that interstate locomotives will also be eligible in this category. Next category is zero emission capable commercial harbor craft. Projects in this category is focused on the demonstration or pilot of zero emission capable commercial harbor craft with a focus on small businesses. Projects in this category will be required to be located in or benefit a disadvantaged or low income community. And I will point out that the definition of zero emission capable is that commercial harbor craft must have at least 30% of its propulsion and auxiliary power be zero emission. Tracy from CARB staff is going to put into the chat a link to the commercial harbor craft regulatory website, which also has a calculator for determining the amount of time that that vessel is in zero emission mode, as well as fact sheets on the regulation. So Tracy, when you have a moment, you can put that in the chat. Next project category is port vehicles and equipment. Demonstration and pilot of on-road trucks engaging in drayage service and cargo handling equipment used at ports, as well as other port equipment. Projects in this category will be required to be located in or benefit disadvantaged or low-income communities. Thank you, Tracy. The next project category is new for CARB, and it's new for CEC, and it's kind of exciting. And that is the demonstration and pilot of zero-emission aircraft and ground support equipment. Focus will be on aircraft for short-haul routes within California and support equipment. I think the language in the funding plan implies that funding would support zero-emission passenger transportation, But I think the goal is replacing combustion aviation, and therefore other types of aviation could be eligible, like aerial agricultural spraying aircraft or other unpiloted aircraft that are currently using combustion technology. And this is a question for the work group, is if we should allow that a small expansion away from passenger transportation. Also eligible here is zero emission ground support equipment, and ideally in support of zero emission aviation. Projects in this category will be required to be located in or benefit a disadvantaged or low income community. And finally, the last of the project categories, and of course, the Tier 4 commercial hovercraft regulatory compliance discussion has its own agenda item. And so we'll get into that after we answer, go through questions on the other project types. But here's the very last category for the project category, a discussion agenda item. And that is off-road construction and agricultural equipment. And here, demonstration and pilot of zero emission construction and agricultural equipment, along with supporting infrastructure. The demonstration of advanced technologies and pilots for large scale deployment of zero emission equipment will be supported. One thing that CARB really wants to understand from this category is how we can effectively recharge or refuel zero emission off-road equipment on site with limited or missing grid support. Projects in this category will score higher if they are located in or benefit a disadvantaged or low income community. Now, thank you, Darren. We are now going to open it up for questions on the project categories. It looks like we have quite a bit of time still, so it looks like we're going to get through everything. So let's go ahead and open it up for questions. Jason, would you like to kick that off?
Sure, thanks, Earl. Again, if you would like to make a comment or ask a question, please use the webinar feature to raise your hand. And if you are participating via phone, please press #2 to raise your hand. We'll announce your name and unmute your line, and please be sure to introduce yourself by stating your name and affiliation. And so with that, it looks like our next speaker is Michael Completa. Michael, there you go.
Thank you very much. Hi, Earl. This kind of ties into the earlier conversation and also the category conversation that we just had. And I think the answers are pretty simple one way or the other. We're developing a novel concept for the shore power aspect for commercial hovercraft. And I'm looking to understand how that relates to the regulations. I won't get into the details here, but can you provide, or can someone provide us with contacts at your end to help interpret, to even see if we're in compliance or if this is a dead end for our idea or others' ideas? And secondly, assuming that does comply or appear to be valid, I think this is also kind of along the lines of Todd Roberts' question. Can CARB help us identify potential interested parties for us, obviously, to do the outreach and selling of our concept? I would imagine that you guys have a pretty good sense of who the stakeholders are, and we can start calling ports and other people, and we have been doing that, but it's not always easy to get to the direct stakeholders or the most interested people.
Right. To answer your second question first, we have an agenda item. It's the second to the last one, and that's team building. And so that'll be an opportunity, and I'll talk about that in more detail, but we have a mechanism to try to help build teams for projects. So that'll be a good way to help with that. Regarding determining if your technology is going to help with commercial hovercraft regulatory compliance, I would invite you to reach out to Tracy Haynes here, who's also on the meeting. She'll be able to either direct you to the right person or answer your question directly if your technology is going to be suitable for the commercial hovercraft regulatory compliance. And
Excellent.
So I'm sure you can see her name here on the broadcast. And so maybe a little later, we can get Tracy to put her email address into the chat so you have that for regulatory compliance questions. It would also be, you could just follow the link that Tracy put into the commercial hovercraft regulatory webpage. And there's also a link there to some staff in that section, and you can get to them that way. Okay?
Excellent, thank you.
You bet. Next question, Jason.
Our next question is from Bruce Applegate.
Hi, thanks. This is Bruce Applegate. I'm at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography in UC San Diego. And I had a question regarding the resilient zero emission charging category.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned that that'll consider refueling. Would that include things like hydrogen and hydrogen derivatives for zero emission commercial hovercraft?
You bet. You bet.
All right. And a second question I had regarding the category for ocean-going vessels. Most of those things seem to be focused on zero emission technologies for being at berth or at anchor. But what about vessels that are demonstrating hydrogen fuel cells for underway power?
That's a great question, Bruce. That's not the focus of that funding for the ocean-going vessels. We're specifically focused on reducing emissions when those vessels are at berth or at port. Things get a little difficult for CARB when projects where we do demonstration projects, like if there was a hydrogen fueled vessel, and because of how the vessel operates and how we apportion benefit to the state of California or to priority populations. And so that's something that we would need to identify. Now, the commercial hovercraft regulatory compliance agenda item, which we'll talk about here next, does have funding available for research vessels to compete for, and so to help them get into compliance with the regulation. So that's somewhere where funding could be used to support research vessels. And I'll get into this in a little more detail here in a minute, but AB 179, which provides the funding for that, specifically lists research vessels as one of the priority vessels that we're going to target. And so, and this is a discussion for them, but how to apportion funding between the different priority vessel types is a discussion that I want to have. Outside of that, I'm really not sure if we have another source of funds within this funding plan to support, vessels that are, out to sea in the blue water be eligible for funding. Well, they would still be eligible, but the way that they're scored could be reduced based on the reduction of emission reductions that are taking place close to shore, if that made sense.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, Bruce. Next question, Jason.
Our next speaker will be Charlie Bogue.
Looks like we lost Charlie. Hey, Charlie.
Can you hear me all right?
You bet.
Right on. Thanks for putting this together. Yeah, this is Charlie Bogue with Wind and Wing Technologies. Just a question on the zero emission capable hovercraft category. Is there going to be any like subcategories based on the various types of hovercraft, like excursion, ferry, and all of that, and any associated like carve outs for estimated award pool that you're pulling from? So if we're applying, we're saying, okay, we're under this subcategory and we know roughly how much money there is available in that subcategory, that kind of thing. And a follow-up question in there is just to reconfirm that because that's less regulatory compliance stuff, that new builds are acceptable in that category as opposed to just swapping or upgrading material equipment.
New builds are totally eligible for funding in all three of the commercial hovercraft categories.
Okay.
Right now, we're not anticipating divvying up the funding for commercial hovercraft outside of the regulatory funding for different vessel types. I think right now, and we're open to having that discussion both here as well as one-on-one or the next work group meeting that'll happen a little later. But right now, the thinking is that all the vessel projects are going to compete against each other, and those that have the highest emission reductions, the best benefit for priority populations, and all the other criteria that I've talked about will just score better. The thing that we want to kind of avoid is dicing up this funding so finely that we're not able to do transformative projects, because that's really what, and I've said this a couple of times, that's really what the goal of this program is to fund projects that have this great potential for emission reductions outside of the demonstration project or the pilot project. So we want to make sure that we don't tie our hands too tightly or paint ourselves into a corner. But with that said, we also want to be somewhat fair with the distribution of funds. And
Makes sense.
I think I addressed your questions.
Absolutely. And I just wanted to answer one of your really early questions, which was,
Okay.
I mean, from our perspective, the people we're working with, I think reducing that match would certainly make an application more palatable, for sure.
Okay. Okay. I could see that, especially with smaller businesses that are operating a commercial hovercraft.
Exactly.
Okay. All right, Charlie. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep. Next question.
Our next question is from Stacy Caius.
Hey, Stacy.
Hello again. So I have a few questions. Stacy Caius with Clean Air Grant Services. You mentioned that ocean-going vessels. There was another caller that had a question about ocean-going vessels from Scripps. And I just wanted to kind of clarify, through different programs like the Volkswagen program, for example, they qualify an ocean-going vessel differently than a commercial hovercraft vessel. And so like the ocean-going vessels that are eligible for shore power funds, for example, are like the container ships and those that are regulated by the OGV regulation. Is this also considering the same guidelines for that, or?
Well, I think our intent is that the commercial hovercraft are those vessels that are regulated by the commercial hovercraft regulation, and ocean-going vessels are those vessels that are regulated by the ocean-going vessel regulations, and those generally are focused at berth operations. The intent really for ocean-going vessel types are containers, oil tankers, cargo handling, things like that. Fishing vessel really isn't going to fit in that box. A research vessel is, I think, already defined as being under the a commercial hovercraft regulation. And since the ocean-going vessel the funding that we have is not focused on those vessels when they're underway, it's really focused when they're at berth or at anchor. That really kind of limits the pool of vessel types that will be eligible under that category.
Okay, so tug wouldn't fall under that OGV option.
Not to my understanding, but of course we're available to have a discussion, and we can bring in the ocean-going vessel staff and the commercial hovercraft regulation staff and make a determination. But on first blush, no.
Okay, perfect. And then can you further define small business? There's a lot of different definitions out there, and I know we've talked about it a little bit offline, but are you still working on that? That's
a great question. That is very nebulous, especially when it applies to a whole wide array of business types. But the only reference though that we have is for a commercial hovercraft. And so a small business, I think we're looking to the work group here to help us define what that small business is. Is it $1 million or less in annual revenue? Is it $10 million or less in annual revenue? I think it would probably be focused on revenue versus like staffing or number of vessels, et cetera. But I would encourage the stakeholder group or you, Stacy, to provide some input on what you think a small business is for a commercial hovercraft.
Okay, perfect. I've definitely sent you my input on that definition, and I'll re-forward it to you.
Great.
And then the last, not a question, just a side note. I think I mentioned I have, several applicants that are looking for funding right now for, commercial hovercraft Tier 4 upgrades. And they likely will be ineligible, just not cost effective enough with the 3-year surplus requirement. So I do want to encourage a quicker application process for the commercial hovercraft community, and then also reducing that match requirement for commercial hovercraft, and just further defining and modeling, closer to the programs that are already funding these types of, projects. And that's all I've got.
Okay, before you go, Stacy, the 3-year surplus requirement, is that in the commercial hovercraft regulation?
No, that's in the Carl Moyer guidelines currently.
Okay.
I believe that they're working to look at reducing that, but it doesn't necessarily help the community because then their projects aren't as cost effective. They aren't receiving the emission reductions needed in order to qualify.
Right. I'll just point out that our program does not have a surplus requirement.
Okay, great.
Okay, next question, please. Questioner.
All right, our next speaker is Leah Harnish.
Hi, yeah. My name is Leah. I'm with the American Waterways Operators. We represent the tugboat and barge industry. Very glad to hear everything that you're talking about. I have a question and a comment. My question is, for all the definitions that you went through, is that written down anywhere? Could you send it to us just so we have that information?
Definitions like what do you mean? What a pilot project is and what a
Yeah, just everything you went over in this section. It was a lot of information. I wasn't able to take it all down.
Yeah, I will point out, I don't have a document that has these definitions in it. These will all be defined in the solicitation when we release that. That's for certain. I also point out that the workgroup meeting is being recorded. So at some point in the next 2 weeks, we'll be able to post this, and you'll be able to refer back to all the questions and everything that we've said. So that's available to you. And I believe that once that's posted on YouTube, there will also be a closed caption. So there will also be a text version or a text attached to the video.
All right, wonderful. And then just a clarifying comment. I think what Stacy was getting at with her comment about ocean-going vessels versus commercial harbor craft, specifically articulated tug barges are ocean-going by nature, but are regulated under the commercial harbor craft rule.
Okay.
And so I think, and I hope I'm not wrong or misrepresenting what her question was if it's something that does function at berth that is essentially an ocean-going vessel, can it qualify under that bubble, even though it's regulated under the commercial harbor craft rule?
And just to ask a clarifying question, Leah, these articulated barges would be able to use the capture control system or the at berth plug-in to reduce vessel engines, because that's the only box in which the ocean-going vessels can participate.
I unfortunately do not have that level of technical knowledge. I believe they can be plugged in, but don't quote me on that. I'm happy to get you that information, and we can get it.
Okay, Leah, my suggestion to you is later on, reach out to me in an email and we'll start a conversation and maybe have a meeting with the ocean-going vessel staff and the commercial harbor craft regulation staff to be able to make a determination for you, so you don't have to waste time over the next couple of weeks trying to make a determination on your own. Okay.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much.
Sure. Okay, next question.
Our next speaker is Mei Wang.
Hi, Earl. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, yes, I can.
So this question is about ocean-going vessels. So I know that you are talking about using the hydrogen technologies, fuel cell technology for effort. Will CARD consider funding the study for the LOLO, for Tier 3 ocean-going vessel LOLO, and develop some technology to reduce emission under the LOLO conditions for the Tier 3 vessels?
Yeah, we don't generally fund studies. The demonstration pilot project program is not a research and development program. And so the goal really is to build on work that's already been done by other companies to accelerate the deployment of that. Now, with that said, having a study being part of a much larger project, that is makes it a little more palatable because then it could be combined with a project that's actually reducing emissions, because that's going to be a requirement. So my suggestion to you, if you want to go forward with an ocean-going vessel project, is to include that type of component in your application, but not solely rely on that as your project.
And also, I know you're focusing again on the hydrogens, and the bunkering will be an issue that for such a high fuel values. And that will you be considering also some retrofit device that can reduce criteria pollutants and certify such after treatment systems?
Well, like I mentioned, and of course, the funding plans that Darren put in at the start of this work group meeting have a very detailed description of the project types. But for ocean-going vessels, we really need to focus on the 3 project categories that are included in the funding plan. And so we really need to focus, if it's a barge-mounted system for ocean-going vessels, we can fund that. We can demonstrate hydrogen fuel cell or other low carbon technologies to power a shore power barge. So we do have a little bit more flexibility outside of just hydrogen, though hydrogen is definitely something that we want to focus on. May, did I answer your question?
Yes, one last question.
Okay.
On the hydrogen fuel cells, will other type of fuel cell be eligible not using hydrogens?
That's a great question. I don't see any reason why not. The funding plan does list hydrogen, but I think the intention was just to be clear, if there was another system that was being used, say a high temperature sodium system, where you're using methanol or something, I think still with methanol, you're still using hydrogen as the energy carrier. So far, there's no restriction. We don't want to limit the technology that's being deployed. We just want to do the zero emission. So fuel cell, I think the expectation is it's going to be zero emission utilizing a fuel cell system, and the fuel source, though conventionally is hydrogen, we would be open to other fuel types. We just have to be cognizant of the emissions that are associated with that.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, you bet. Next question.
All right, our next speaker is Lauren Goularte.
Hi, Earl. This is Lauren Glardy from the Water Emergency Transportation Authority. We operate San Francisco Bay Ferry Services. For the commercial harbor craft pot, and I, apologize if this has already been stated or if this is widely available knowledge. If an operator is submitting an alternative control of emissions plan to comply with the commercial harbor craft requirements, and that plan includes zero emission vessels, can the operator apply for a zero emission project from that commercial harbor craft, or is it just restricted to Tier 4 engines?
And we'll get into this more detail here in a minute when we get into that project category, but no, it's not limited just to Tier 4 emissions. We can fund, we're going to be required to fund some zero emission with that $60 million pot just based on the funding sources alone.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you so much.
Okay. Sure. Next
Okay.
question.
Our next question comes from Ken Franke.
Good afternoon, Earl. Thank you for the presentation. Just a recommendation on the matching funds. If you can do a detailed description of what is permissible, because I think a lot of that after action, data collection, interviews, meetings, all that type of stuff, plus the retrofit, I think that will also bring some comfort to that matching fund definition. Thank you.
Sure, Ken. And I'll just take a jump at that now. Of course, we have a more detailed description in the solicitation when we get there. But match funds really is split between cash and in-kind. Those cash funds can really be anything that is being spent on the project. And like Ken was alluding to, the projects that we're going to be funding are complete projects. They have data, they have reporting, there are lots of meetings that are involved, there are other costs that are associated that can be used as cash match. And as I indicated in the discussion earlier, the U.S. Coast Guard approval process can also be used as in-kind match, even if that process has already started right now. And so it's pretty wide open. Fuel that's or consumables that are already owned by a vessel owner can be used as in-kind. The salary of the vessel staff can be used as cash match during the data collection period, as well as the costs in the shipyard to actually repower those engines in some of these vessels. Those costs can also be included as match. And so if there's a vessel owner that is doing some of his own work or her own work on the vessel, the reasonable rate of salary for that vessel owner could be used as a cash match, assuming that they are getting paid. And so it's kind of wide open, the ability to use match. We just have to be a bit creative in how we apply it. And so maybe as we move forward in the next work group meeting, we can have a little more deep dive on what's eligible in match and what's not. Do you have another question, Ken?
I did. The second part was, as you know, we're interested in doing a program that involves a large number of vessels. And how deep into the weeds do you envision us going as far as, do you want a segregation of each vessel, machinery, et cetera, or a cumulative quantification of emissions reductions of the entire package?
Yeah, and Ken, that's really a good question for the next agenda item, though I'll answer it here. And that is, we're going to want to know the exact or the estimated exact emission reductions from the project. So it's going to be a vessel by vessel. So we're going to want to know each vessel, the emission reductions that we're going to get, and that's going to be based on usage as well as an aggregate. And so we'll have to do those calculations, and there will be a calculator available to help you do those calculations.
Great, thank you, Earl.
You bet.
All right, it looks like our next speaker is Graham Balch.
Yes, hi, Earl. This is Graham from Green Yachts. I have two non-category specific questions and one category specific question. The first is, have you informed the AQMDs about this funding if they are going to be co-applicants? Because our contacts at the AQMDs said they don't yet know what the process looks like, is the first question.
Okay, well, we don't normally, specifically notify the air quality management districts about pending solicitations. They are embedded in our process. We do offer some briefings to the larger organization, the California Association of Air Pollution Control officials. But really, for air districts have been embedded in our process since 2009. And so, like an example with South Coast, Bay Area Air Quality Management District, San Joaquin Valley, we've been doing projects with these air districts year after year. They know our process. And so I would suspect that you just may be speaking to someone that may not be aware of that process. And when you're talking with the air districts, it's important to mention that there's administrative funding available. If they have any questions about, what are you talking about? We don't know what this is. You can give them my contact information or let me know, and I can reach out to them to inform them about the opportunity.
Perfect, will do. And the second, is there any information that's available to explain the role and their process for a municipality or other public entity that could be an applicant with a private operator?
What we have is all of our past work on solicitations. And so the last one, which I think was capture control for oil tankers, which we did back in 2019 or 2021, I think it is, outlines how that relationship should go. And so, if there's any question on that, you can reach out to me. I'm more than happy to educate, you or the vessel owner or an air district on what that process is.
Great, thank you. Yeah. And the third is for the short run ferries, 11 of the 13 short run ferries are not able to apply for Moyer funds.
Okay.
The exception being Brad Engel's ferries down in San Diego. All California applicants got turned down for infrastructure funding from the Department of Transportation. None can apply for VW funds. And you mentioned earlier that CORE is not allowed. I would just urge increasing the match for zero emission commercial hovercraft projects or making the CORE funds able to be stacked, because the options are very limited for short run ferries will have zero emission requirements. Thank you.
Thanks for that comment. I'll speak with the CORE staff. Right now, the first determination is we don't want to match funds with CORE because CORE is oversubscribed already. And so if we bring in match funding from core to allow it to be matched with our project, we're reducing the number of projects that core could fund directly. So that's something that we're very cognizant of. But short run ferries are definitely included in the next agenda item. So I'll just save my comments for that there in detail, but they are included in the priority list of vessels that'll be funded. Do you have any more questions, Graham?
Thank you.
All right, next up is Joanne Golden.
Perfect. Thank you for allowing me to jump in again. So I am hearing a lot of interest on Harborcraft, which is very, very, very exciting, but it does lead me to feel a little concerned about all of those other project categories and whether or not, to be quite frank, they stand a chance with what seems like a really voluminous list of companies you want to go after and support on Harborcraft. I am curious, given the fact that you want to achieve a number of different types of projects in this, if you've considered some sort of a max per project category.
Yeah, Joanne, we haven't considered a maximum yet. I think we may consider a minimum, like with green zones, as you heard, it could be quite nebulous. It could be, we don't want to have, even though, it'd probably be beneficial to have, 1,000 separate green zone projects. That workload would become just unmanageable. I am not. I don't have the fear that we're only going to fund a commercial hovercraft. We have so many project categories and so many needs that are important for CARB, like zero emission locomotives. As I mentioned, we're really interested in off-road, zero emission off-road and ag equipment and how to charge that. Those are things that we're going to spend money on this cycle, assuming that we get good applications. We're also excited about zero emission aviation. We have a tremendous example to start demonstrating a technology that CARB can't really regulate, like with locomotives. And so there's a lot of great opportunities. But like I said, we're not bound to fund every category that we have. But there's a reason why a commercial hovercraft are so predominantly included in these two funding plans, because there's an incredible need there that we have to address. And the regulation is forcing this change toward cleaner and zero emission, and we need to support that. So, Joanne, if you have any ideas of how to set up the scoring criteria to be more fair, I'd love to hear that. And I'm not asking you to do that now. But either in between the two work group meetings or in the second work group meeting to help us come up with some ideas. We'll have an agenda item at that work group meeting to talk about specifically the scoring criteria. And so maybe that'll be a place where we can kind of refine that and get that in a way that most stakeholders think will be fair for everybody.
No, I think that sounds like a good opportunity, or I'll put some thoughts together with the G&A team, as well as a couple of our clients who want to bring those types of projects that you just listed that you want funded brought forward. So
great.
We will certainly work on that. Thank you.
All right, Jan, thank you. And Jason, how many more questions do we have lined up?
We have two more.
Oh, let's do it then. Let's do it.
All right. Next up is Ed Elliott.
Hi, Earl. Thanks for taking my question. Appreciate all the information so far. Ed Elliott, I'm with Pre-Scouter, a small technical consultancy. So we do a lot of supporting sustainability projects. And I just wanted to clarify, I know you mentioned it twice now with the core funding, specifically with relation to the agricultural equipment project. Looking at that infrastructure for the recharge piece, is the implication that they should seek to completely separate any core funding from a pilot project that they'd apply to under this program? In that you were saying it couldn't be stacked, or could it be included as a component if it's a larger pilot that they're applying for funding for here?
Well, I think the important thing with core is that we're not going to use core funds to satisfy a match requirement in a project. And so
Okay.
that's what we're talking about. Now, if there's a company out there that has core funded equipment, that does not make them ineligible to do a demonstration or pilot project. What we want to see is, you know, a standalone demonstration or pilot project with its own infrastructure funding, not relying on core to support those elements of the project. Now, if you have a core funded piece of equipment and the contract with that piece of equipment's over, then that's a different story.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. Thanks so much.
You bet. And one more question, Jason, and then we'll go on to the next agenda item.
Sure. Our last raised hand is Mei Wang again.
Hi, Earl. I just want to clarify. I heard Graham was indicating that they had this is May from South Coast AQMD, that Graham had indicate that he had reached out to us, and we didn't know what he's referring to. We had participated in such a program for many years. So yeah, Graham, if you want to reach out to us, please, you can reach out directly to me. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, May. Okay, so I think I'm good to go. I don't need a bio break now. So if everybody's okay, we'll just keep going. I definitely want to get into the have enough time for the commercial hovercraft and that discussion. And I just want to remind everybody that, you know, there will be a recording of this and a list of participant names and affiliations. And of course, we will have the share list, but we'll go into more detail about that in a minute. So Darren, could you put the agenda back up? Thank you. And now we're going to talk about Tier 4 commercial hovercraft regulatory compliance. So this funding category is a bit unique and different from the others that we've been discussing. For one, the data collection period for vessels in this category could be significantly shortened or modified to reduce the burden on vessel owners. Emission testing of every funded engine in this category may not be the wisest use of funding when these engines are already commercially available. And I say that because typically for demonstration and pilot projects, we require emission testing for any combustion technology that's being funded. But like I said, you can see how that may not be the best use of funds. With all that said, however, there's pretty clear guidance from the legislature on how the funds should be spent. And there is a list of priority vessels that we will focus on. When I say that, it's also true that any commercial hovercraft subject to the regulation could be eligible for this funding. But like I said, priority is given to a select group of vessels, so scoring would favor those. Now, I'm going to quote AB 179. And AB 179 states that in awarding funds, the board shall consider prioritizing projects based on maximizing emission reductions consistent with the commercial hovercraft regulation. The board shall prioritize private ferry operators regulated by the PUC, public ferries, licensed commercial passenger fishing vessels, research vessels, and excursion vessels. So from that, CARB has two things that we need to do. One is prioritize projects based on maximizing emission reductions consistent with the commercial hovercraft regulation, and two, prioritize the vessels listed in the legislation. CARB will require that commercial hovercraft funded under this category support the cleanest available technology for each vessel type, while also bringing the vessel into compliance with the commercial hovercraft regulation. For commercial passenger fishing vessels, when upgrading to Tier 4 in combination with DPF aftertreatment would require a vessel replacement, a Tier 3 engine repower would be eligible for funding. For other regulated vessel categories where Tier 4 engines in combinations with DPF aftertreatment are not available in the needed power category, Tier 3 engines plus a diesel particulate filter would be eligible for funding. As you recall, I mentioned earlier that funding for this category was separated from the rest of the funding available. However, the funding source, AB 179, has two sources of funds, the general fund and GGRF, like I mentioned. $20 million of the available $60 million is from GGRF, and therefore requires that there be greenhouse gas emission reductions. Therefore, only the $40 million in general funds is available for combustion projects, full combustion projects. This funding will be used to support at least $20 million in zero emission capable vessel projects. With this funding, we can support pre-commercial demonstrations of technology that would allow vessels compliant with the CARB regulation. Diesel particulate filter projects that allow for a wider array of vessel types to be able to employ the technology could be eligible for funding here. Keep in mind the goal of any demonstration project is to get CARB certification or verification if that is available. I would suggest that projects proposing more advanced technology solutions will fold in more data collections and reporting than those that are just doing engine-to-engine repowers. Now we're going to pause for questions on this category. So Darren, thank you for taking down the agenda. Jason, would you like to tee it up?
Sure, thanks, Earl. Looks like our first hand is from Stacy Caius. Stacy, you can go ahead now.
Hi again. So 20 million is for zero emission type projects from the greenhouse gas perspective. Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
Give me a minute, Red. I have a really large lab that loves the UPS man.
I bet.
So is this in combination with the other category, the ZEV capable CHC for small businesses?
This is standalone, so this is its own set of funds. The funding for the other commercial hovercraft projects that we talked about previously are accessing the other pot of funds, the non-60 million.
And does the 20 million have to be allocated towards a repower type project, or can a vessel for vessel swap be allocated?
Yeah, there's no requirement that the $60 million be focused just on repowers. We can do new builds, we can do repowers, we can be a conversion from combustion to zero emission, totally, or combustion to zero emission capable. So we have that flexibility. The legislation directs us to maximize emission reduction, so that's what we're going to do.
Okay, so let's say we put in an application for, the zero emission vessel category for small businesses, but maybe it's a better fit, under the 20 million for the CHC category. Will CARB kind of shepherd us through that process, or do we need to apply for both?
Yeah, that's a good question. And this is my recommendation. And that is, in your application, if you say, okay, we're going to apply for the zero emission commercial hovercraft funding that's not with the regulatory compliance, is you put a statement in your application that if funding is exhausted in that category, that you would like to be considered for the regulatory compliance funding. And so having that language in your application allows CARB and CEC to then exercise that flexibility. I would also suggest, and this applies to everybody that's going to be doing a larger project, and that is have language in your application that allows for scaling. So if you're the last project on the list of funded projects and you're requesting $10 million and we only have 5 million, you want to make sure that your application has the flexibility to do a smaller project. And so having that language in your application allows us to exercise that flexibility.
Great, thank you so much.
Great question, Stacey.
All right, okay. Next up we have Leah Harnish.
Hi again. So I have two questions. The first kind of goes off what Stacy was saying in terms of the application. Someone had talked about earlier if you were able to put multiple vessels under a single application, or if you'd want to do multiple applications, one for each vessel, and you had answered that. Sorry, let me find my notes. You'd answered that if it's the same project, you can put it all together. And I was wondering if two vessels have the same end requirement, but they're going to be two different types of retrofits or repowers, would those want to be in the same application, or would those be considered two different types of work?
My suggestion would be to bundle those. We don't have a restriction on, combining multiple vessels in one application. But when I say that, you're not required to. If you're, a single vessel owner operator and, you want to go it alone with your own grantee, then that's your choice, and that's not going to be a reason to not get funded. That's
Okay.
definitely allowed, yeah.
Awesome, thank you. And then my second question is, you had said that if tier 4 engines plus the diesel particulate filters is not available, tier 3 plus the DPFs is allowable. But what happens if there is a tier 3 engine commercially available, a tier 4 engine commercially available, but no diesel particulate filter that works with that? Does that mean that those vessels with those engines are completely ineligible?
No, what we want to do is be able to get them as clean as possible and compliant with the commercial hovercraft regulation. And so, like I said, we need to support the cleanest available technology for each vessel type. And so, if they can only do tier 3 with no DPF, like many vessels out there without a replacement, then those would be eligible for funding.
Thank you. And I also was hoping, do you have the timeline for the solicitation project awarding? Is that anywhere?
I spoke about it at the beginning, but the overall timeline is, the goal is we're going to have another work group meeting here in a couple of weeks, maybe a month. Then we'll release a solicitation sometime in early spring. That'll close late summer. Then we'll do awards early fall, maybe really, really late summer, and then then start to get into grant agreements, resolve CEQA if it's required for your project, and then get into grants by the end of the year, starting work on the project at the beginning of 2024.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much again.
You bet, Liam. Okay. Another question?
It looks like we have no more speakers at this time.
That's amazing. Wonderful. Okay, Darren, if you could throw back up the agenda, we'll do our last 2 agenda items, and then we'll have a final request for questions, and then we'll be done. I apologize if you guys can hear my little puppy crying in the background. Okay, so applicant team building. We would like to foster team building in support of this solicitation. We can do this the old-fashioned way, where everyone interested can send me an email with team building in the subject line, with their name, affiliation, email, phone number, and description of what they can do. Send me that email by February the 22nd. I'll compile those within 2 weeks and email it back to everyone that sent in a request to be on the team building list, and send it to anyone that requests it going forward. And so if you want to be, and I know that there's lots of air districts that are on the call today, as well as nonprofits. If you want to be a grantee for a project, you can send me that email, and then with the required information, I'll go over that one more time in a second. Then you'll be included in that list. And then what you're essentially doing is saying that it's okay for these other people to contact me about opportunities. And so you're going to send me an email, right, to my email address, which is in the chat. It's also on the meeting notice, with team building in the subject line, with your name, affiliation, email, phone number, and a description of what you can bring by February 22nd. And again, I'll compile those within 2 weeks and send it back out to everyone. Okay. And I'm also open to other team building techniques. So maybe if you have some other ideas, maybe we can talk about here in a minute. Now, the final agenda item is next steps. And it's not a long agenda item, but I do want to point out that this is really just the start of the process. We are planning on digesting all that we've heard today and try to refine our proposal. The goal is to have another work group meeting that addresses the issues that were raised today before the release of the solicitation. Like I said, we're targeting early spring for the release. So look for the next meeting notice for the workgroup meeting, and then the release of the solicitation. I will point out that once the solicitation is released, CARB and CEC can no longer answer questions about this solicitation. So your time is now. You can send me an email, and we have a one-on-one meeting with CARB and CEC and other CARB or CEC staff that would be needed to have as part of that meeting, like I said, with the ocean-going vessel staff or commercial hovercraft regulation staff. So send me that email. We set up a meeting, talk about your project, if it's going to work, if it's not going to work, what eligibility is, disadvantaged community, everything that we've talked about. And so with that, I'm done with the remarks. I would like to open it up for the last round of questions. Thank you, Darren. So this is our last opportunity. I know we're running just a little bit early, which is amazing. But if we need to, we can spend the next 30 minutes answering questions. So Jason, are there any more questions?
Yes, we do have some questions coming up, and it looks like our first speaker is going to be Stacy Caius.
Hey, Stacy.
Hey again. Hey, I wasn't quite tracking with the team building exercise. So are you saying that we are sending an email for team building on behalf of the clients or the half of the project that we're working on? Or is this a team building exercise to be a part of like a larger group to help develop and shape the solicitation?
I want to say yes to both of those. Really, the goal is to avail yourself and what you offer to other teams that are building up projects. And so if they're looking for a data collection group, then they look to this team building list and see that we have a couple listed. They reach out to them to see if they want to be part of their team. I would honestly like to see the team building list be used, in any way possible to facilitate better projects.
Okay, great. And then my other question is, and I should have asked it during the commercial hovercraft discussion, but how will CARB handle the after treatment technologies that aren't yet CARB or EPA verified? For example, the net technology Blue Max Nova that I believe is going through demonstration demonstration process through South Coast AQMD.
Okay. Okay, I can't comment on a certification process, but if there is a project where there's a DPF, as an example, that's not yet CARB certified or verified, it's still eligible for funding under a demonstration project. I would state in your application that the diesel particulate filter or whatever the piece of equipment is in the verification process and should be verified soon. And so that would give CARB, when we're scoring that application, a little bit of confidence that you're already through the process a bit. We have a high belief that it's going to complete and get certified. So that would be a good thing. So I would just state that it's in the verification or certification process and you expect to be completed at whatever date. It would not make you ineligible for funding under this category.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, it looks like our next speaker is Changfeng Wang.
Hey, Earl, and everyone. This is Changfeng from the Bay Area District. Thank you for the holding the meeting, and the Bay Area Air District also is following up with this solicitation. I do have a question about the admin percentage. You mentioned the 5%. Is that a maximum or no, can be higher? Because actually this is lower even than the Moyer admin cost. And also considering we have to submit like the quarter report and other work, kind of question for you to consider how to set the admin cost. And some projects may be small, so then we may not have the admin revenue cover the project or the work.
Okay. It's a good question.
Yeah.
Thanks for that question. Historically, we're at a 5% maximum for admin. As I recall, that's not in legislation, so that would be a policy. And so if I'm understanding you correctly, you're asking if we can increase that admin amount, say to 6% or 7%. That's something, that's a great question. I can't answer that now. I'll go back and we'll talk with our team about that. The only issue is the more admin dollars that we spend, the less project dollars that we get. So we have to balance that. And so, but I understand from past projects that we've had with some grantees that they've exhausted their admin dollars. And then they were still had to carry that project forward. So that's a great point, and we'll see what we can come up with.
Yes, that's what we have been doing for the Berry demo project. And also my next question and the last question, will the commercial hovercraft, the compliance funding follow the same process as the other part? Like also, the it's kind of similar process?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it will.
Yeah, thank you. Those are my questions. Thank you.
Same thing. Yep.
Okay, our next speaker will be Charlie Bogue.
Hey again, Earl. I actually was Cheng Feng just asked basically the same question I was going to ask, which was, is there any? I'll elaborate a little bit, but I guess my question was if there's any dictated minimum or maximum length of a project. I know you mentioned, starting 24 and got to be done by 27. Related, and then what I was getting at is his question, which is if a project runs too long, obviously the longer it runs, the more administrative costs there are, or is there like contingency built in or something like that? So managing that administrative cost and knowing how do we target what the length of our project would be, basically.
That's a good question, Charlie. Like I said, the deadline for the projects is in legislation, and so the only way to change that is with legislative action approved by the governor. Now, I say that, and it seems like a high bar, but we've been able to do that with most of the project funds that we've implemented so far. So it's something that we're capable of executing if that's needed. But I caution you on that because we don't want these projects to just linger and linger and linger. The goal of the projects is to advance the state of technology, and the time to do that is now. We don't want a project that lingers and lingers and lingers, and then when it gets time to complete, that technology has already been implemented in other aspects of vessel operation or whatever. So we've got to be cognizant of that. But there's no, just because the project starts in 24 and ends in 27 doesn't mean it needs to go all the way to 2027. But if the project is in such a state that it can be completed in 18 months, then that's great. We can do that too. There's no requirement that it extend the entire time. And so it's going to be up to the individual applicant teams to decide what's a reasonable amount of time to operate the project, and also factor in time for things that you're not considering. And so, of all the projects that we've done, the 42 or 43 projects, there's always delays in infrastructure installation. And so you need to kind of anticipate that. And that if there's a need for a contingency plan, you outline that in your application. These are the things that you need to think about when you're developing a timeline for a project.
Totally, very helpful. Yeah, thank you very much. We're aiming for shorter than longer, by all means.
Okay. Yes, very good. All right, Jason, next question.
Our next question is from Courtney Carew.
Hi, can you hear me all right?
I can, Courtney.
Hi, this is Courtney Carew with San Francisco International Airport. Apologies if this was covered already, but for the aviation project category, is zero emission ground support equipment charging infrastructure eligible for funding, or solely the equipment itself?
Both.
Both. Okay, great.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
You bet.
And it looks like our last raised hand for the time being is from Lauren Thie.
Hello, I had two questions. The first is, what shifts in the match ratio for small businesses, hovercraft, large businesses are you considering? Is it like a 50% reduction? Do you have any idea?
Sure. So historically, like I said, our match is 1-to-1. we did a solicitation back in 2016 where we shifted that match ratio to 25-75. So the state would pay 75 and the applicant team would pay 25. And so that's as low as we've gone, and the highest that we've gone is 50-50. And so we'd be open to, discussions about how that match ratio could apply to different project categories, or different, if there's a low or a small business, as an example, that maybe can't get to that one-to-one match. So that's about as flexible as we can go, would be about 25. Though with that said, we don't have a requirement that there be a match. That's not in legislation. That's in our policy, and I'll tell you, that's a lesson learned the hard way. So I doubt that we'll go down to 0 on a match, but we would be willing, I think, to discuss going down to 25%.
Thank you. My second question was, would a large company be anything that doesn't fit into the small business definition, or would that be defined differently?
That's a good question. I really don't have a good answer. I think right now, the only place that we use small business definition is with a commercial hovercraft zero emission, a commercial hovercraft, not the $60 million standalone. So it would have to be related to a commercial hovercraft. So that does limit our need to define that. But I don't have a good answer. Is there any more questions, Lauren?
No, thank you so much.
Okay. Any more questions, Jason?
We have one more raised hand from Bruce Applegate.
Hey, that last question brought up a question that I have. Yeah, this is Bruce Applegate from the University of California, San Diego, at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography. And that is whether CARB will consider the magnitude of a cost match in the scoring of a proposal.
Yes, definitely. Those with higher match will be scored higher.
All right, thank you.
You bet. Sure. Okay, any more questions? Last chance for this work group. Okay, Jason, I assume that there's no one?
No more questions at this time.
Great. So I'm going to wrap it up. And so thank you everyone for participating today. We've learned a lot, I'll tell you. As I mentioned, CARB and CEC staff are available for one-on-one meetings if anyone is interested. Now, my email address is in the chat, but I'm going to read it out here just for everybody who may not have access to chat, or you're writing it down. So my email address is earl.landberg@arb.ca.gov. And so that's EARL.LANDBERG@arb.ca.gov. Also, a video of this work group will be made available on the Low Carbon Transportation and AQUIP meetings and workshop page once it's complete, which will be about 2 weeks. And with that, I want to say thank you and have a good day. And that's it.